Today we're going over some of the most audacious, jaw-dropping, and frankly unbelievable prison escapes in all of recorded history. These are the stories of people who looked at walls that were designed to be completely inescapable and decided, you know what? I'm going to figure this out anyway. And some of them actually pulled it off in ways that make you wonder how any of these prisons were considered secure in the first place. We're talking tunnels, helicopters, dummy heads made out of soap, and at least one man who walked out of a maximum security prison dressed as a janitor. I'm so excited to get into all of these. Let's start with what is probably the most famous prison escape in American history and maybe the world: Alcatraz. Located on a small island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, the federal penitentiary known as Alcatraz opened in 1934 and was considered essentially the toughest prison America had ever built. Maximum security, minimum privilege, built specifically for the most hardened and unrepentant criminals in the entire federal system. The guards ran 12 cell checks a day. The bars were reinforced steel. The guard towers were positioned strategically around the perimeter, and surrounding all of it on every side were the freezing swift currents of the San Francisco Bay, which the prison administrators openly bragged would kill anyone foolish enough to try to swim through them. In 29 years of operation, 1,545 men did time there. 36 of them attempted to escape across 14 different attempts. Every single one of them was either recaptured, shot, or drowned, until Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers showed up. Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January of 1960, transferred there after a long string of convictions for burglary and bank robbery, and perhaps more relevantly, repeated escape attempts at other prisons. The administrators at Alcatraz presumably thought, well, he's not escaping from here. John Anglin arrived later that year. His brother Clarence followed in early 1961. All three already knew each other from previous stints behind bars. They were assigned to adjoining cells, which in hindsight was probably not the smartest decision the prison ever made. Morris was notably intelligent, reportedly testing in the top 2% for IQ, and he quickly took the lead on hatching what would become one of the most meticulous escape plans ever documented. They had time, they had motivation, and they started looking very carefully at their ventilation ducts. Joaquin Guzman. You probably know this man better by his nickname, El Chapo. By the time Mexican authorities finally caught him in 2014, he had spent 13 years as one of the most wanted men on earth, running the Sinaloa cartel and moving staggering quantities of drugs across the U.S.-Mexico border. So they threw him into Altiplano, one of Mexico's highest security federal prisons, and presumably felt pretty good about it. Here's the thing about El Chapo, though. His first escape from a Mexican maximum security prison back in 2001 had involved bribing guards and hiding inside a laundry cart. Simple, effective, and honestly a little embarrassing for the prison. His second escape, on July 11, 2015, was on an entirely different level. Guards noticed that Guzman had been spending a lot of time in the shower area of his cell. When they went to check on him that evening, he was gone. In the floor of the shower, beneath a small trapdoor, was a hole approximately 20 by 20 inches. That hole dropped nearly 34 feet straight down into a vertical shaft fitted with a ladder, which connected to a fully excavated tunnel that stretched for over a mile underground before emerging inside a half-constructed house located just outside the prison perimeter. The tunnel was 5.5 feet tall, wide enough to move through comfortably, and was equipped with its own lighting system, its own ventilation system, and a modified motorcycle mounted on tracks that had apparently been used to haul excavated dirt out during the construction process. Someone had been digging this thing for months, possibly longer, directly beneath one of Mexico's most secure prisons, and nobody noticed. Guzman stayed on the run for 6 months before being captured again, extradited to the United States, and eventually sentenced to life in federal prison in 2019. The guards backed away from the man with what appeared to be grenades. His wife landed the helicopter on the roof. Michelle climbed aboard, and they flew away together. I mean, honestly, as far as romantic gestures go, learning to fly a helicopter to break your husband out of prison using fruit painted to look like explosives is pretty hard to top. Their freedom didn't last. Nadine was eventually tracked down and arrested in southwestern France, and Michel was shot in the head during a failed bank robbery not long after. He survived miraculously and was subsequently recaptured. But the escape itself became one of the most talked about prison breaks in French history. Pascal Payet made the helicopter approach almost a personal trademark. A convicted murderer serving time in France, Payet first escaped in 2001 when accomplices flew a helicopter directly to the roof of his prison and collected him like a taxi pickup. 2 years later, while already a wanted fugitive, he orchestrated a helicopter escape for 3 other prisoners from the same facility, apparently just because he could. He was eventually recaptured and sentenced to 30 years. Then, in 2007, a group of masked men hijacked a helicopter, landed it at the closely guarded prison where Payet was being held, and jumped out with sawed-off shotguns. They blasted through security doors, grabbed Payet, and flew away. He was caught again months later in Barcelona. Authorities eventually moved him to a prison in an undisclosed location, which, given the pattern here, seems like a completely reasonable precaution. Redoine Faid was another French gangster with a particular fondness for dramatic exits. In 2013, he led a group of accomplices who smuggled weapons and explosives into his prison, took multiple guards hostage, and blasted through a series of security doors to reach him and break him out. That would have been enough for most people. But in July of 2018, Faid engineered a second escape. His accomplices hijacked a helicopter and flew it directly to the prison facility on the outskirts of Paris, landing in the courtyard and collecting Faid in broad daylight. The whole thing took roughly 10 minutes. He remained free for 3 months before being recaptured in a suburban apartment. French authorities have presumably since invested heavily in anti-aircraft considerations for their prison infrastructure. Omid Tavili's escape is perhaps the most quietly absurd on the entire list because it required almost no engineering whatsoever. An Iranian-Canadian organized crime figure, Tavili was being held in a maximum security prison in British Columbia in 2007. And then one day, he simply walked out. He had bribed a guard to look the other way, put on a janitor's uniform, and strolled out of a facility that was specifically classified as maximum security. The guard who took the bribe was prosecuted. Tavili, as of the last available information, has never been caught. He is considered extremely dangerous and is believed to have connections to criminal organizations across multiple countries. The maximum security prison has presumably revisited its uniform policies. In May of 1984, 6 death row inmates at the Mecklenburg Correctional Facility in Virginia, a place administrators had specifically described as escape-proof, walked out through the front gate. The group was led by brothers James and Linwood Briley, who were believed to have killed 11 people between them. Their plan involved taking prison guards hostage at knife point, forcing them to hand over uniforms, and then wheeling a laundry cart containing 2 of the escapees through multiple security checkpoints, while the remaining 4 walked alongside dressed as staff. They drove away in a prison van. 6 convicted murderers drove out of a maximum security death row facility in a prison van. It took authorities 3 weeks to round all of them back up, catching the last of the group in Philadelphia. The Mecklenburg escape triggered a complete overhaul of security protocols across Virginia's correctional system. Glenn Stewart Godwin escaped from Folsom State Prison in California in 1980, and his story inspired what many believe became the plot of The Shawshank Redemption, which honestly makes a lot of sense when you hear how he did it. Godwin, with help reportedly from his wife and his cellmate, located a storm drainage pipe running underneath the facility and spent considerable time preparing his route. He crawled through roughly 1,000 feet of that pipe and emerged outside the prison walls. He made his way to Mexico, where he promptly became involved in the drug trade, which led to his arrest and imprisonment there. While serving time in a Mexican prison, he killed a fellow inmate and escaped again, this time successfully vanishing. He made the FBI's 10 most wanted list in 1996, where he remained for years, and as of the most recent public reporting, he has never been found.